Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for coming in today. It's great to have the opportunity to engage with you. Apologies of me going in and out. I had questions in the Dáil as well, so forgive me for that. I wanted to ask you in particular about the offshore renewable energy sector, and obviously where we are with that, where the opportunities are, what escalation there has been from your perspective in the last period, particularly through COVID, but in particular following the invasion of Ukraine and the concerns, the heightened and increased concerns around energy security. If you wouldn't mind updating me on that, it's at the front of the brief.
Thanks, Deputy. In relation to the offshore, the focus that Ireland had over the last number of years, say up to 2020, was particularly on wave for the offshore, because it was something that we were going to have enough onshore wind, and then we were looking at wave as a new technology because we have fantastic wave resource on the west coast. However, that has changed over the last number of years in terms of policy, and just this week we had the new bill launched in relation to the maritime planning opportunities, which again there are 7 projects now in the offing that have been in development and planning and doing their environmental assessments and all that. 6 off the east coast and 1 off the west coast. And in terms of the offshore opportunity, as the CEO has said, 5 gigawatts of offshore energy is what's needed in relation to address, by 2020 or by 2030. So the progress that has been accelerated over the last 12 months or more has really been on the planning side and the consenting side, and to get the streamlining of those actions in place.
Sorry, may I interject just from my understanding, the planning on the east coast in particular, and the fixed wind turbines off the east coast, those different models, one of which is in my own area in Dún Laoghaire. Yeah.
So in relation to that, so the idea is that the projects that are in planning are in train at the moment, that they have the opportunity now to use the new planning system and to prove that they are eligible, to get a consenting, which would be in place then from next year to be able to kick off in 2023 in relation to moving to the next stages and to get approval from the Minister to actually move to the next stages.
May I ask you just in respect of those, when do you see them as being functional? Assuming that things go through?
The ambition is that some of those could be operational in terms of the early stages of operational by 2025 or 2026, but coming on stream in 2025 with the supply chain, and that's ensuring that all of the ducks, are in a row in relation to what needs to happen there, both in the planning, the environmental, the consenting, the grid connections, and all of. But a lot of the environmental work has been progressing over the last number of years in terms of seabed surveys, bird analysis, all of those kind of things, that are consultations. So a lot of that work has been ongoing, but it is to make sure that it follows due process through the maritime bill.
Some of the concerns. Oh, sorry.
And that then they should start to see them been installed and starting to kick off from 2025. The first stage, it won't be completely built, but at least the first phases are starting to come on stream from there.
And how has the engagement been? Because some of the feedback I'm getting is that, it's all very well planning ahead, but that the connection points aren't there yet. The connection points aren't being paced in the same way. Do you have a concern in relation to that?
Well, again, it's everybody's shoulder is to the wheel in relation to this. So across government, in terms of Department of Planning, Housing and Planning, our own department, any Department of Marine, any of the actions that are required are all been worked on together. So that's the group in terms of working on it, and that's where we would take good heart that there is good momentum. Okay. And EirGrid have been given the ownership to look after the offshore transmission grid, and in terms of they're working on that as well. So
and do you think
there's still a lot to happen, but the momentum is there in terms of everybody.
Do you think there's any issues in fully utilising the energy through the current national grid, or does it need to be upgraded? And how much upgrading needs to be done? Do we have the capacity in the grid to utilise what's possible, even within the period to 2030? And I'll come to
Well, there's going to be grid, and that's what EirGrid have in terms of their own grid strategy. It's not something that we're directly involved with. We obviously feed into it, and there needs to be strengthening of the central system, but that's what EirGrid are working towards, and they are saying that it can be done.
And in terms of then the opportunity, you know, there's a lot of discussion in the industry at the moment around the timing of floating turbines and when that may come. What's your own perception of that? Because obviously the opportunity there off the west coast is just without parallel, and it's in all of the briefing documents going back right to the the documents on your own website, the 2011-2050 strategy. You know, the opportunity is without parallel to be getting, and actually that document from I'm sure it is from 2011, it isn't dated as such, but it does describe being at a point now in the 2020 to 2030 period where we'd be exporting energy as a consequence of our, essentially, I guess you were describing it as wave, but now potentially floating offshore. Where are we on that?
Okay, in relation to the wave didn't quite develop as fast, and it's very tough regime in terms of operating there. But what has come on stream a lot faster than we realised is floating offshore wind. And floating offshore wind has been tested and proven at scale in the North Sea. And the opportunities that are there, they say that like a turbine doesn't operate 100% of the time, but in the North Sea you could get about 40 to 45% of the actual, and maybe even a bit higher than that, of the effectiveness of the turbine. If we go into the Atlantic, you could get up to 80% because of the wind. So there's a huge opportunity there, and that floating technology is now been proven at the North Sea. And where we have our own Atlantic Marine Energy Test Site, which again we want to see that operational by 2025 as well, to test some of these floating offshores for the Atlantic and that as well, so that we could see them coming on stream a lot quicker than we had realised. And possibly, again, it'll be the consenting, because it'll be much further out, they'll be beyond the horizon, but much bigger scale. And again, it's evolving at a lot faster pace than people had originally realised. And we'll probably see floating wind coming in around 2030, I'd say.
Yeah, because I got a briefing from the department from housing, which was anticipating it being commercially viable around 2037, and then that's been pulled back and back and back. But speaking to operators in the system, and I mean Irish-backed operators who are operating right across Europe, what I'm hearing from them is that Ireland, and actually I might put this question to the department if I may, that Ireland isn't ready in terms of grid, it isn't ready in terms of strategy, it isn't operating at the pace that the market is operating in terms of being ready for the commercial viability and the viability of offshore floating. Is that right? Where are we on that?
Well, I mean, it's been a commitment in the Climate Action Plan since the 2019 Climate Action Plan to really upscale. So the steps and measures are being put in place, the resources are being put in place.
What measures? What specifically?
You'll have to forgive me, Deputy McNeill. I'm actually not working on that side of the house myself.
I might go to Mr. Walsh then, just in the interest of my time. Excuse me.
Thanks, Deputy, and thanks for the questions in relation to this. I guess, as my colleague has outlined, the offshore opportunity is a jigsaw. And you've hit the pieces of the jigsaw, the grid, the investment from developers. What we see in SEAI, we've seen a real acceleration of this. We've seen the department focus on driving the delays that were in the consenting system. Within the department, there has been an upscaling in terms of resource to this area. So what we're seeing is an acceleration of activity to support the deployment of offshore wind to the timelines that are outlined in the Climate Action Plan, and possibly sooner, given what we see at the moment around the security of supply issues that are arising from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we are encouraged as an organisation of what we see, but we need that to continue to accelerate, and also we need very, very strong engagement from communities, because they are critically important to this piece, and their buy-in, their engagement, their consultation, their consent, their promotion of this is hugely important, because we've seen in the past where if we get things wrong, it pulls everything back. So I think it's a piece that we all have to push forward to as a society.
No, I agree. That's why I'm asking you, and that's and I think the opportunity is extraordinary. And given the fact that it's gotten pacier, as it were, commercially, and that's what we're hearing from industry, given that sentiment, I think, is changing in relation to offshore, not just because of the climate imperative, but because I think people see potentially more readily the energy security difficulty that we have. I think there's a huge opportunity. I see it changing in my own constituency in Dún Laoghaire, where you're talking about visible fixed turbines off what is a beautiful coast, and other constituencies will have that too. But I see attitudes changing very considerably, and the opportunity is now. And so thank you for answering my questions. I'm so interested in it, and I'd love to hear more from you about it in the future.
Thank you.
Just one last piece in relation to that, Deputy. In terms of the floating offshore, it's not necessary that they may need to have a grid connection. They could actually, and what they've looked at in the North Sea is storing hydrogen in the base of the floating turbine and plugging in, decanting that hydrogen, and then take it on ships back to onshore. So there's other ways in terms of that technology evolving as well, rather than just thinking that everything has to be grid connected. So that's the other
Which
part.
Which helps even more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Deputy Carty.